I am from Minnesota and have enjoyed the Boundary Waters National Wilderness my whole life. In this project, I searched for the cultural reasons behind the recent protection of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area from sulfide ore mining. In June 2022, the U.S. Forest Service analyzed the impact of the current 20-year mining ban on 225,000 acres in the headwaters of the Boundary Waters. This ban protects and preserves water quality, scenic integrity, important wildlife corridors, and high-quality recreation values of this national treasure that relies on the complex and interconnected ecosystem. The city of Ely, which borders the Boundary Waters, currently relies on a tourism economy. However, the city was built upon a logging and metal mining economy in 1891. I discovered a tension between wanting mining back or to preserve the health of the nature that surrounds those who live there. For many Ely residents, fishing and playing in lakes, rivers, and streams are some of life's greatest pleasures and pastimes. For others, the health and vibrance of these aquatic resources are much more critical. They're a way of life. The cultural construct of nature as sublime and a frontier lays the foundation of the American ideal that nature without colonists was in its wild state. In colonial America, the social relationship with wilderness began with fear, domestication, and a divine duty to work the land. This relationship later became romanticized, leading to the protection of this so-called uninhabited wilderness in the form of national parks and wilderness. The Minnesota Conservation Volunteer magazine emphasizes the powerful and magical transformation that happens in nature. It also gives examples as to how dynamic relationships between land use, climate change, and water movement sometimes create scenarios that cut too close for comfort. As we learned in the lecture about Chinese people and the gold mining in California, the environmental damages from mining in the Boundary Waters are almost certain from contaminated waterways, infrastructure, and storage of mining waste. While some residents of Ely prioritize the sublime wilderness, others who argue for the frontier are honoring the immigrants who did the back-breaking labor, those of the entrepreneurs who took risks, and those of all the pioneers who carved out a community in the wilderness of northern Minnesota. Save the Boundary Waters is leading the effort to ensure permanent protection for the wilderness from toxic sulfide ore copper mining, and I visited their headquarters in Ely, Minnesota. Do you feel like people who live here agree with your mission?
A lot of them do, but there's a good chunk of people that want Ely to go back to when it was a mining town.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is now Ely has developed a whole new tourism push in the economy. And so they really are concerned about the Boundary Waters being polluted because it would destroy the tourism economy in Ely.
Mm-hmm.
But there are plenty of people that argue that the only way to get our economy booming again would be to bring a mine into Ely because of how many jobs it would create.
Mm-hmm.
And there are plenty of people that live here whose parents worked in the mines as they were growing up, so they're very mining oriented.
Yeah.
A majority of people here would agree with us, but there's a handful of people that think that mining would be more economically beneficial for the city of Ely. And I mean, it would bring a lot of jobs to Ely, but it would be a temporary boom because they would get all their minerals, they would pack up, and then they'd just leave. And they would leave us with all of the pollution and all of the damage that they did.
Through my research and conversation with Morgan, I learned that the Boundary Waters mining debate boils down to a prioritization of preserving this wilderness and a capitalistic priority that uses natural resources to push economies ahead. According to William Cronton, the modern environmental movement itself is a grandchild of romanticism and a post-frontier ideology. From this, the United States has the national parks, and in this case, protected the national wilderness. Will Steger, climate activist and founder of Climate Generation, stated in regards to the Boundary Waters Canoe Area that we need the preservation of our dwindling wild places now more than ever. These areas increase climate resiliency and are vital for the survival of humanity on this planet. In the American Outrage documentary, I noticed how protecting the land was a weak argument for the Shoshone Native people in the face of mining, and I was curious about the situational differences that resulted in federal protection of the Boundary Waters. In visiting the town of Ely, I immediately noticed that it has a predominantly white population, similarly to the state of Minnesota that is 83% white. Currently, in Minnesota, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, DFL, controls the legislature and the governor's office. Notably, 4 of its 5 elected officials are white. Democrats also control the presidency and Senate, setting rules for departments such as the Department of the Interior that protects this country's natural resources. Last year, the Biden administration canceled 2 federal mining leases held by Twin Metals along Birch Lake and the headwaters of the Boundary Waters. Those leases are required to mine the valuable metals underground. By looking at both political parties, it's clear that white people hold the most political power in America. This supports the argument that environmental protection of the Boundary Waters has been enforced because the white Democrats who support the issue are currently holding power to make these decisions, whereas the Shoshone people were virtually powerless because they had no racial representation in the Republicans' presidency and Senate at the time. In conclusion, I found that the protection of the Boundary Waters stems from a tight relationship between residents and visitors whose lives are sustained by these pristine aquatic resources, and more importantly, the fact that current, predominantly white Democratic parties in power support policy that protects this national wilderness from mining.